The game of the week for week four between our two undefeated teams lived up to the hype, a 3-point win for Lob City in what was almost an overtime game. It was very close on that last shot by Ethan Austin to force overtime, but a good game, a back and forth game, and the champs prevail in that one. And in the other game on court one, the Road Dogs improved to 4-0. So we do definitely have some stuff to break down from week four. We'll get to court two as well, but those two teams remain undefeated and we'll see how long that can last in the winter 24 season. I have Wyatt and Colin here on the Week 4 postgame show. I'm Joey. Let's start with that game, guys. I mean, highly anticipated. I put some of you guys, and I don't think it was neither of you guys. So actually, you both can say you picked it correctly if you wanted to. But I put the analysts who were here last week on the spot. I made them make a pick, and it was split. And like I said, the game lived up to the hype. It is Lob City 73-70, who come away with the win over the halfway crooks in our finals rematch. Both teams looked different, but it was a lot of the same Lob City in this one from what I kind of talked about last week, from what people have seen season after season from them. Before I get carried away with any of the stats, let's throw it over to these guys. The only thing I will say, kind of before we dive in, Lob City kind of early was getting a lot of transition buckets. They had a little lead in that first quarter and won the first quarter for whatever's that, whatever that's worth. The halfway crooks with a huge second quarter went on their run up 13 at the half. And by the time we started the fourth, it was a single possession game. So that's kind of how quickly things shifted. The fourth quarter, I believe Lob City was up by 6, maybe like that. I think that was it. 6-ish was their largest lead in that fourth quarter. And then it tightened right back up. They made their free throws. Joe Secator having a blast out there as he always does. Just, talking his shit, I'll say it, but makes those free throws down the stretch, forces it to three, and then, like I said, the game tying shot misses on a 3-pointer from the halfway crook. So Wyatt, we'll get to you first on this one, but we'll let both you guys jump in. I mean, go wherever you'd like. That was an awesome fourth quarter, a good game overall, but what stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean that whole game was a nail biter. I mean, all the way through. Very physical game too, because if I'm not mistaken, there was two people who fouled out in the game. It was very physical throughout. I mean, Lob City, their strength is obviously the paint. You can see that from their own name, Lob City. You know, Colin Burns put up 35 points, and almost all of them were in the paint. He had so many putbacks throughout the game. That was clutch for them throughout. It was their go-to. If they miss a shot, they got a second chance point almost every time.
And I think the halfway crooks learned quickly, especially in that fourth quarter. The lead's gone, like I talked about. Right now, it's like a new game, final quarter. And we were trying to avoid some of that foul trouble, which was kind of my main responsibility in this one. And you talked about Charles Alexander and Charles Correa fouling out. So there you go. The law firm, as I call him, Charles and Charles, ended up fouling out. But Devin Devampina had 4, as you can see there on the screen, and he was kind of the other one in the mix, just as one of the bigger bodies, right? And so we talked about that, and Colin Burns getting a lot of those second chance points throughout the entire game, but especially in that fourth quarter, as I was trying to kind of rotate and match lineups, right? And so when Colin Burns was the lone bigger guy or guy who plays big for Lob City, we were trying to get away with either having Charles Alexander out for a minute or two, Devin Devampina out for a minute or two, and that didn't help as Lob City was going on their run. It wasn't, the reason Lob City's a good team, but it didn't help to see Colin Burns kind of having his way, getting easy baskets. He does that anyway, but partially because of, the lack of size that we had on the floor at times. So, yeah, Colin, where do you go with it from there? What stood out to you?
So I don't. You're talking about Colin Burns' size. Obviously, he's big, but I think their biggest adjustment that they did make was they're finding the soft spots in your guys' 2-2 because I didn't really see the 2-2 defense be played in this league just because it's weird to do that. But they had someone running the free throw line, which would turn into backdoor cuts for him. And also in the 2-2 zone, there was the two guys up top for your guys' team. They were usually shooting out for fast break. So that led to more of just Colin Burns just putting his body into just one lone guy instead of the guards coming down to help. But once they figured out that 2-2 defense, they really just went on their run, and he was unstoppable once they figured that out.
Yeah, and we'll get to some stats here in a second, but a couple things on that. Great points. I mean, the zone, especially when there's a less guy, one less guy on the floor, right? Four instead of your normal five in a basketball game. Either way, when you have four or five guys, it's a challenge to rebound out of a zone. That's one of the things you hear, right? Because you're kind of boxing out space rather than your man, right? When you're playing man. So imagine now it's even less people, right? More space you have to box out in that scenario. And players like Colin Burns crashing and Lob City getting those second chance points. Despite all that, and I agree with you that it is difficult to play that. We had a double-digit lead, as in the halfway crooks playing that in that second quarter. So that begs the question, and we can even kind of let whoever wants to jump back in one more time, and then I promise we'll move on. But how much of that was Lob City just missing shots, where that happens in this league too, right? No matter, there's been good teams that maybe don't have these stretches, but for the most part, no matter how good the team, you're going to have a stretch where shots just aren't falling. Turnover here because you're just a miscommunication. You miss a three. You miss an easy one on accident just because you're human, and then you look up and you're down 10, right? Because the other team didn't miss during that stretch. So I'll
Right.
go over the stats after this. But yeah, Colin, how much of it was maybe just, the halfway crooks making shots and Lob City not versus something else in that second quarter?
So I think when Lob City came out in the first quarter, um, Lob City they were up by I think it was 4 points, and the second quarter they went on that big run. I think that in that first quarter, um, Lob City really they didn't really know the zone and didn't know how to work through the zone yet because it's just like so new. Everyone usually plays man, but I know if you guys played man defense, there would have been a lot of mismatch. So I think like during one of their timeouts, they must have talked through the zone, and yeah, they were missing their threes. I think they prioritized their paint game over their threes once they realized that zone because even though there was that open look in the corner from time to time, the more high percentage shot would come through the Colin Burns in the posts or Joseph driving and kicking to Colin Burns. But I think the biggest thing they figured out how to break that zone.
And there is that open space, right? It's almost tempting, and that's part of the thing with any zone, really, but especially with a zone in this league. You're tempted to shoot it because you're open, right? Because there's only four guys and it's the same size court. So you have good looks. And for Lob City, they took 16 threes. So they were taking them. And I think the majority of those came in that first half. And that can kind of feed to your point, right? Where they were taking a little more than they wanted to. They only, in the game made three. So even if you go 3 for 3 from a stretch, the rest, which they didn't, it was spaced out, but they took more than they wanted to, which kind of got them out of that rhythm and I think allowed that lead. And then they got, they focused on the paint, like you said, and kind of erased that lead right away. So it's funny, last season the halfway crooks did more of a 1-3 zone. So like we've tried different things, and it's not, last season we had the size. It was mainly to kind of save some of the stamina and also kind of get out and run a little easier because you just from how it's set up, right? That still happens in this type of zone. The lack of size maybe pushes us more this season to that zone compared to last year where we were able to man up. And it's really more of a changeup. I mean, we did it primarily in this game. You're totally right. And not that I didn't like it because I could have changed it. Not that I have a part say in what kind of happens with the halfway crooks, but I think it was working, right? And it wasn't, a complete negative. So we kind of stuck with it, I think, longer than we should have. Even if it is working, I think it's better used as a changeup in this league. We're going to get to the Road Dogs in a second, who made 19 threes as a team. So, that's going to be interesting, them against, that zone, depending on how much we do it against them. But just to kind of give you some stats and move along, Colin Burns, 35 points, like you talked about. Joe Secatore, 17 for himself. And really Jordan Grace, 10 points, and everybody else was kind of just filling in the gaps there. So, Lob City really led by Colin Burns and Joe Secatore. And for the halfway crooks, Charles Correo at 23, 5 and 9 from three. So he was shooting it pretty well. Devin Devon Pina, 16 and 11. We talk about that size, right? And I think one thing I was thinking of, in addition to the offensive rebounds, which were kind of even, Charles Alexander shooting 6 of 13 for how long and athletic he is. And you guys saw some of him last week. his ability to get inside and get easy ones where he goes 9 for 11. He goes 13 for 15 more nights than not. So for him to go 6 for 13, kind of uncharacteristic, even though it's a good shooting game, and the game was still super close, right? 1.7 seconds left. Ethan Austin gets a shot at the basket, after some close execution down the stretch. So these teams meet again in week 7, I believe. They definitely play again. It is week 7. So we get to see it again at least one more time, if not another time in the playoffs. And we'll talk more about that when we get there. But let's get the court 2 games weren't super close. So let's kind of talk about that other undefeated team. I think they've earned it, kind of to semi lead the show in a week where a finals rematch happens. It's only right to kind of get to the Rhode Dawgs, who do improve to 4-0, and they take down the Air Mambas 91-59. We talked about all the 3-pointers they made. You guys were both on this game, so we definitely kind of want to give them their flowers, as they say, right? And kind of shout them out a little bit. 4-0. That's 4 wins that aren't going anywhere, right? So, no matter what happens, right, they're going to finish 4-4, and I would expect better than that for sure with how they're playing. Mark Washington hit 8 threes by himself, and then Anthony Lyons, their captain, made 5. So, not that it's only them two, Jalen Ardrey with 4 himself. So, I know I can list off the stats, but they shot it very well. I know Jared Hansen was on, working the scoreboard, helping out this game, and he's on the halfway crooks and was like, they haven't missed. Like, it feels like they haven't missed. And, just maybe the Air Mambas on the wrong end of that, but 51% from 3, 19 of 37 for the Road Dawgs, and 56% shooting from the floor, right? So they almost shot it as well from deep as they did from the floor in general. So I don't expect that to happen every week, but what did you guys like? Let's go to Wyatt first on this one. What did you guys like from the Road Dawgs as they improve to 4-0, and they still will play the halfway crooks in Lob City, right? So not to completely ignore this game, but what did they do well that will translate in the game against the other teams that we kind of put them in the same tier as?
Obviously, the floor spacing is going to be hard to defend no matter the team. It doesn't matter if you're an elite defensive team. If any team is shooting 3-pointers like that, they put up 37 threes and made 51%. It's not normal. And even though their offensive game was dominant, their defensive game was also dominant. When I was watching the game, it seemed like the Air Mambas were settling for a lot of bad shots, which is what slowed down their offense a lot, because they were chucking up these threes that were very low percentage, and it seemed like they were just trying to get the ball up because they couldn't get it in the paint as much as they could in other games.
Hi, I'm here. Sorry. Yeah. So, I think, that goes a lot to, especially once you're down, right? Kind of feeling the need to kind of chuck up threes, but totally, even early in that game, trying to match the Road Dawgs, and maybe that's not the best way to go about it, right? When a team like that gets hot, matching them from deep may not be the best plan of attack for the majority of teams. 6 of 18 for the Air Mambas from 3, as you can see there on the screen if you're watching. Like we talked about, 19 of 37 for the Road Dawgs, and we'll list off some more of the stats in a second. But Colin, I know anything else from this game you can definitely bring up, and then besides the shooting, how are they? Or you can look ahead a little bit to them versus Lob City and halfway crooks, separately. But what kind of things are they doing that you think will translate?
So from what I remember watching their first game, they've definitely came a long way to the point where, they're top 3 in the league. And I think the biggest improvement that they have made is, I think, just spacing the floor. They do a great job of spacing the floor, and they know they really live or die by a 3. They'll drive and kick. They'll pass out shots for threes, but those shots are passing over a good percentage of shots. They're going to live or die by a 3. So it's going to be interesting if you guys do decide to play zone against this team to see what you guys are going to have to do. Where are you going to put guys? But I also think their team chemistry, they're really tight group guys. I can tell. They were talking to me when I was doing stats, saying on the way here, they're talking about how this is Mark Washington, this is his coming out game. I'm telling you right now, and there he goes for 36 points, and I was shocked to see he only had 8 threes, which is crazy to say. I thought he had 12, but he's gonna light your team up if you guys don't adjust that zone, because he's gonna have wide open looks in the corner.
And I think I'm not going to say that they're a smaller team. I think they're smaller than Lob City, or at least they play smaller, right? And I think that's a big, difference to point out where they have some taller guys. Sure, there's a height limit in the league, but if they're kind of driving and kicking for those threes, that kind of leads to them playing like, a smaller team maybe, right? So I think, man to man should work. We're talking about the halfway crooks, and Lob City is just going to do what they do and man them up and try to press them a little bit. And I think, you know, the Road Dogs were not afraid to run in this game. You know what I mean? So that's a good sign as well. If you can make a ton of threes, that'll keep you in any game. And if you're okay, kind of picking up the pace a little bit, especially against, I think, both the halfway crooks and Lob City who prefer that bodes well, right, for the Road Dogs, where if they're hitting shots and able to kind of match the offense and the pace on that end, the defense will be there, right? So Luis Ramirez, again, I think he's been, in the Air Mambas. I can switch to the standings really quick, but fall to 1-3, and you see there the Road Dogs and Lob City both undefeated, still at 4-0. But for the Air Mambas, Luis Ramirez has been awesome. I've enjoyed watching him, and so wanted to shout him out for sure. 28 points, 13 of 17, 11 rebounds. Really been their best player down low. I think that's safe to say, and kind of attacking the basket and not afraid, and is a piece that if he keeps playing like this, it's going to help them immensely throughout the rest of the year to kind of snag some more wins. Mark DaCosta, 9 points, Mario Valerio, 9 points, and Anthony Ramsey, 7 and 4. So for the Mambas, you can even see there in the breakdown, it, kind of got out of hand in that third quarter, but they were there in the first half, 10-ish point game, kind of taking shots back and forth, and then just too much of the Road Dogs there. So I will turn this off as we kind of head over to court two. Enough on that game, but shout out Road Dogs 4-0. And let me preview who they get next week. The Regulators and Road Dogs will play next week. And the Regulators in week 4, coming off their second straight win. Want to get that right. Yep, their second straight win. So they are 2-2, the Regulators, after they handled the Gym Rats 70-50. So I'll get the stats up here in a second. This game was at 9 o'clock, so I'm going to throw it to Colin. I know I didn't see much of it, but I can tell from the box score, and even some of the highlights I've seen and some of the live stream, Tommy McSparran, huge game. And we talked about him. I'm sure even in, 2 post-game shows ago when you guys were both on here. I don't think he was there last week, and they missed him, and so he's back doing his thing. Justin Titsworth with 19 as well and 5 threes. So, Colin, even just from this one and what you've seen this season, I mean, they lose their first 2, right? Now the Regulators win their next 2. And so just to kind of throw it to you with a little bit of, a look ahead for them. We talked about them getting the Road Dogs, so that's a good test. And sure, just a shout out again, they lost by 1 in week 1 to the halfway crooks, right? So they are, sure, woulda, shoulda, coulda, right? But they're 1 point away from being 3-1, right? And some other things go some other ways. That goes for a lot of teams. But they are 2-2. They get the Road Dogs. They get the Air Mambas in week 6, which will be a seeding matchup, kind of jockeying for position. They get unaffiliated in week 7, and then All Waves in week 8. So, Colin, just from kind of this team and the Regulators winning 2 in a row, what impressed you? Yeah, what impressed you about them? Yeah.
I think depending on what the seeding is for the playoffs, this is going to be my sleeper team. I think they're going to make some noise in the playoffs because as long as they have a fully healthy team, as you said, they lost their first 2 games. I know their second game they're missing 3 guys, so it was a hard rotation. But if they have Justin Titsworth taking threes that are just off the pass, where he's not taking it directly off the dribble, their offense is hard to stop because he had 5 threes last week. I think he had more than 5 threes last week as well. He also had 6 steals, which is very impressive. That's you don't see that very often. But as long as they run their offense for Justin Titsworth to be shooting, catch and shoot threes, and Tom McSparran is also great at getting offensive rebounds and dishing it back out for good looking threes for Titsworth. But out of Gym Rats, it's Brandon Whitman once again. I think they've just been struggling, putting the ball in the basket lately, but hopefully they find their rhythm going into the second half of the season. But yeah, I think the Regulators are going to be my personal sleeper pick.
Yeah, and it's all about matchups, right? So we will get there for sure. But the regulators, you talked about them not having you know, some of their players in week two. It was Lob City who took them down in week two. So not to disparage anyone. Um, it may not have mattered who showed up just because that's how good Lob City can be at times. But obviously, you'd like to have your full team, in any matchup like that. But Justin Titsford, like you talked about, through 4 games, is averaging 5 made threes a game. So I checked for you while you were talking. So yeah, he's been killing it from deep, and having a player like that is huge to kind of continue that pace. The regulators in week 5 take on the Road Dawgs. The reason I said that is because we talked about the Gym Rats who won in week 1, right? We talked about them and Brandon Whitman, and then they're losers of 3 straight. And we talked about the second half of the season for the Gym Rats. They get ready to take on Lob City and get a little taste of what Lob City is like next week. So a tall task next week for the Gym Rats. After that, they get All Waves, they get the Road Dawgs in week 7, and the Halfway Crooks in week 8. So we're gonna kind of see if they can pick it up. I mean, I know they have some pieces, and I expect them to be in some of these games, but not the easiest schedule for kind of doing the NFL strength of schedule, right? The rest of the way for the Gym Rats. I mean, they play the 3 top teams in the standings, the 3 of the last 4 weeks, right? So that's their chance, right? Make a statement heading into the playoffs. There's their chance. Let's get to that other game on court 2. Again, a larger margin. It is, not as large as I thought. It is Always taking down unaffiliated 77-64. Let me get that open and we'll get over to Wyatt, who again I know didn't see all of this game, but it was Always who, a big fourth quarter. I don't mean to steal his thunder, but I know even looking at the stats, we can kind of tell they took care of business in the fourth quarter and blew it open thanks to Josh Tapina's 29, and he made 7 threes. So a lot of, people always talk about it's a dunk league, the low rims. I mean, a lot of shooting, like it's, and especially in this league this season, I feel like more than normal. And that's with Lob City, who has shooters. You guys may not believe me, but Cody Crawford has made a lot of threes in this league. He's been in the league a while, so that's not a knock on him at all. But he's made a lot of threes. He's had some big games. And that's with Lob City really not making a lot of threes. Joe Secator is a good shooter, right? And they've kind of taken a different approach. And despite that, a lot of threes made so far through 4 weeks in Rhode Island. So Wyatt, even just on All Waves, who get their first win, they were very excited in the post-game interview. I know that. But talk about, Josh Tapina and even just some other players that you've seen on this team as they try to kind of build on this momentum.
Yeah, I mean this was a really good game for the All Waves. I mean, they put together a great game. I mean, obviously Josh Tapina put together a masterpiece. He had 7 threes made and only 11 attempts, which is great. And then the team also played great defensively as they had 8 steals, which is, I mean, if you're getting 8 steals, you're going to be shutting down the other team's offense. And you can see that because even though the other team shot 50%, they managed to pull out the win because they were spacing the floor and they were able to create shots that they weren't they wouldn't have been able to get in the other games that they lost. I mean, they pulled away their first win, and the stats show up. I mean, they put together a good performance, and looking on to next week, if they keep this going, they'll be able to pull out another one.
Are you sure? You take that back right now because you know who they play next week? Damn right. The halfway crooks. I was getting there. So Wyatt, all right. Wyatt is on I lied. Is on the All Waves. Sorry. All Waves takes on the Air Mambas. All right. My bad. My bad. I was on to unaffiliated. I thought he was talking crap about unaffiliated. Sorry. All Waves get the Air Mambas like we talked about. And then in week 6, they get the Gym Rats. All right. And then All Waves get the Air Mambas again in week 7. So they're one of those teams that actually, and like they talked about in their interview, already played the top 3 teams. Right. And so that's their 3 losses. So now we kind of get to see really where they fall in the second half of the season. I was getting ahead of myself. Sorry. Unaffiliated in this one falls to 0-4. And that was my point that sure, they're 0-4, that they're trying to turn it around. And I think they're playing better. A 13-point loss. They were in this game for most of the game. And then they're like, all right, we're playing better. Like, let's see who we get next week. Halfway Crooks, who just lost by 3 to Lob City, right? And then after that, for unaffiliated, is Lob City. So, one of those teams that just needs to try to get a statement win right? Keep it close against these teams and hang around, and then who knows what can happen. And that goes for basketball in general, right? Keep it close, hang around, and then and make some plays, right? In week 7, unaffiliated gets the Regulators, which will be a great game, and then the Air Mambas in week 8. So still some chances for them, but it doesn't get easier for them after this one. Just a shout out Eric Fowler with 19 and 10. I think he's been one of their bright spots, and Seth Coates 5 threes made himself. So, we talk about the shooting, and unaffiliated is no different. 10 of 25 for 3 from them. Before we wrap, because that is all of week 4, and we did a lot of looking ahead to the schedule, I'm putting these guys on the spot. So through 4 weeks, I can't remember what I did in the past. I think it was a player, but yeah, I'll use this question even if I've already done it. All right. It's going to be a team. Okay. And you can tell your reason why in a second. But which team not named? Yeah, this is going to be a tricky one. And Colin already alluded to it. But which team not named Lob City, Halfway Crooks, or the Road Dogs do you expect to win 2 playoff games? Or would you think has the best odds to win 2 playoff games? What that means is which team could possibly find themselves in the finals if not those one, 2 of those 3, right? And so that's a tall task. Is there a team? And I'm kind of putting him on the spot. And I may shift the question because I'm not the biggest fan of that question because I think the odds-on favorite are those 3 teams. Let's do it this way. Sorry, I'm changing it. Which team, not those 3, do you think can win 1 playoff game? Even better. So what team do you think will be the 4th team in the Final Four? Most likely, right? Who's your favorite? That's better. Who's your favorite to be the 4th semifinal team if we assume it goes chalk? Okay, that's better. Let's do it that way. That's a lot less like, first take-ish, right? You don't have to just make some stuff up just to, make stuff up. All right, Wyatt is into this. He likes it much better now. So who's your team that you would pick to kind of be in the Final Four with the 3 teams that are starting to separate themselves a little bit?
I mean, I got to go with the Regulators. I mean, they look really good against their win against the Gym Rats. I mean, they're 2-2, so they're not far out of the conversation. I mean, their last game they played well. I mean, they just got to get that efficiency up. Some of their shooting percentage is a little lower than we want it, but if they get that up, I think they'll have a chance. And if they get a little more, I mean, they play well on the defensive end, but against those higher, the better teams like Lob City, the Crooks, and the Road Dogs, they just need to be locked in on defense to get the win.
Before I get to Colin, the kind of the best or the easiest path, so to speak, we talked about those matchups, right, is going to be the 4 or 5 seed doing this, right? Because if you're the 6 seed, then you'd play the 3 seed, which is either the Halfway Crooks or the Road Dogs or Lob City. Same with the 7 and the 8 seed, where your first playoff game is against one of those top 3 teams. So really the question is, what of the 2 teams that can find themselves in that 4 or 5 matchup, because we don't need to predict a huge upset until we see those matchups, right? But Colin, which team in that kind of 4, 5, 6 is going to finish in that 4 or 5 matchup where then you like their chances to get into the semis?
So I would double down on the Regulators, but I'll spice it up. I'll go with I'll take the Air Mamas, even though it did get ugly against Road Dogs. I do think they were some bright spots in that win. If they figure out how to actually utilize Luis Martinez, once he got the ball in the post, like he could not be stopped. He knows how to use his body, and he's a relentless finisher around the rim. And I know they're Mark and Mario, they had off game shooting as well. And if you look at the stats in this game, other than just threes, they lead in just about every other category, which is very interesting after losing by 40 points. So other than the Regulators, I would go with the Air Mambas, and Luis Martinez will go on a no. Luis Ramirez will definitely have to carry load there.
And I think a lot of this, because of where we're at in the season, is going to come down to the remaining teams on the schedule, right? So the Regulators is a great pick. Air Mamas is a great pick. I mean, I think really, unaffiliated, if they were playing certain teams, could win 4 in a row and get into that 5 seed, right? I mean, that 5 seed is probably going to be 4 and 4, maybe 3 and 5. So really, who's going to finish and have that many wins? This question largely comes down to, well, who you playing, right? Like we talked about, some of these teams have, the Halfway Crooks and Lob City next. I mean, that's going to make it tough to win the tiebreakers and get up to that 5 seed when 2 of your games are against 2 of the better teams, right? And you already find yourself kind of with 3 or 4 losses. So I like it. Regulators, Air Mambas. All right, some teams to keep an eye on. Shout out All Waves. So if they, I don't know their schedule, and again, that's a huge part of this. They're playing well. They got the first one. That's the key. Get the win and keep it moving. Yeah, just while we're on it, the tiebreaker will be head to head. So if there's 2 teams that finished with the same record, depending on how they fared when they played each other, that's our first tiebreaker. So those games mean even a little more when you're kind of playing those teams near you in the standings. Week 4, a good one, even though the halfway crooks fall. It's all right. It's going to be fun. We get them again in week 7. I'm excited, but a very, very good game. Rhode Dawgs, halfway crooks coming up. Rhode Dawgs, Lob City coming up. That's the good stuff. A lot to learn about all the teams left in the league, and that's our post-game show. Wyatt and Colin, good job. No picks this week. You guys are off the hook. There's no. We'll have you make some picks soon, so then the players can run their mouth to you when they prove you guys wrong. That's the fun stuff. We used to do a lot more of that, and it would get a little out of hand, to be honest. Like every week we were making picks, and it was like middle of the game, running down the clock. I told you, like, don't you pick against us? I'm like, all right, we gotta it's not that serious, all right. Like everyone's got to calm down and have fun, which they do. So we'll see you back on the court for week 5. Wyatt and Colin, thank you, and go Crooks.